Well, this time our protagonist lives in ancient Rome at the end of the 3rd century BC, and through her eyes we will see one day of the eternal city's life and find out how difficult it was to be a woman in the legendary ancient Rome. You may ask, well, what was the name of our protagonist? She had no one. The thing is that in ancient times girls didn't even have proper names there. A girl used to get the name of the family in which she was born. That is, in the Julia family, the girl was called Juliana. In the Claudia family, girls got the name Claudia. Well, if there were several girls, then they were called even simpler. The first, that is Una. The second, a Secunda. The third, a Tertia, and so on. Our Tertia, as you have already guessed, was the third daughter in the family of a wealthy Roman. She was married by her father at the age of 15 to a man twice her age, although it used to happen in Rome much earlier. She couldn't stand her husband Andronicus, but there was nothing she could do. He had several mistresses among the slaves, and while he called them to his bed, our Tertia had to wait patiently in the next room. After all, when married, a woman from her father's property literally became the property of her husband, as well as her children. There was complete inequality in the Roman bedrooms. Women were obliged to remain faithful to their husbands, passionately give birth to their sons, but their husbands could enjoy their lives as they wanted and have both mistresses and lovers. The main thing was they had to be slaves or prostitutes. The Roman philosopher Seneca described women as wild and reasonless creatures. A woman in ancient Rome couldn't own and dispose of property. She couldn't manage the family budget. Tertia wakes up very early, at dawn, along with the whole city. Even if she wanted to sleep really, she would hardly be able to do it because of the noise on the street and in the house itself, which was raised by slaves cleaning and baking bread. Lying in bed when the sun is up was considered something extremely obscene and depraved. That's what a respectable matron shouldn't do, and she's already 18 years old. Yes, don't be surprised, this age was considered more than major at that time. The average life expectancy in ancient Rome was only 25 years, although many Romans often lived to old age, of course. The thing is that such a small average life expectancy was influenced by very frequent deaths of women during childbirth. Being a woman in Rome was very risky. Well, our matron Tertia went to refresh herself. A decent appearance was a civic duty for both men and women. Moreover, the appearance of a wife was the key to a successful career of her husband. The Romans also loved face masks, just like we do now. But their masks were made not only from the ingredients we are familiar with: goose fat, kingfisher parts, or gladiator sweet. It was a miracle remedy. It was believed that it worked as an aphrodisiac. Roman women also wore heavy makeup. Commoners generally painted themselves pretty tasteless. Already in ancient Rome, the nail art fashion appeared. Nails were polished with a mixture of blood and sheep fat. Other authors mentioned crocodiles' droppings used as blush. And of course, every Roman woman dreamed of thick unibrow. For some reason, such women were considered especially intelligent. The beauties did strange things for the sake of having monobrow and the status of an intellectual. They even built up their eyebrows by gluing gold hair. But at the same time, there was no tan. The aristocrats were ready for anything to make their skin as white as possible, to make it clear they were not commoners working in the fields. Their skin was bleached with chalk. They drew fake blue veins on their hands. Well, our protagonist dressed up today with a special feeling. She wanted to be gorgeous and moved on to the most difficult task, a hairstyle. It was definitely impossible to cope it without a hairdresser. By the way, it is the ancient Romans that we owe the fashion to dye our hair blonde. Sometimes merchants brought wigs made from the Gaul's hair to Rome, but natural hair was much more appreciated. To get the desired blonde, the hair was wiped with a sponge moistened with a mixture of goat's milk and beech ash, and then dried in the sun. Especially wealthy ladies even sprinkled gold on their heads to get the cherished blonde strands. Tertia lives in Domus, a large mansion that easily housed a library, rooms, kitchen, and swimming pool. And most of the Roman families lived in a high-rise building called insula. The higher the floor, the poorer the inhabitants. If the apartments on the first floors reached up to 200 square meters, then on the last floors there were tiny rooms, even without windows. Steam heating was only on the first floors. The rest of the building was heated with braziers. That is why these buildings often burned down. In some houses there was a toilet for rich tenants, but only the one for the entire floor. After preparing, Tertia goes to breakfast. With her husband and children, she already has 2 girls by the age of 18. The ancient Romans used to eat 3 times a day. They had the usual breakfast, lunch, and dinner. At the same time, they didn't sit at the table. They preferred to eat as a family lying down on couches. A light breakfast at about 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning usually consisted of flat bread, cheese, vegetables, and fruits. Tertia's husband, Andronicus, drained god manure every morning to increase the energy level in his body. Slaves either boiled it in vinegar or ground it into powder and added it to other drinks. By the way, according to Pliny, the great admirer of goat manure was the Emperor Nero. But the main delicacy of ancient Rome was the incredibly fatted garum sauce. At the same time, it was more than perfume. Garum was part of most recipes and often replaced salt for cooks. It was made from fish blood and entrails and fermented for several months. The sauce stunk so bad that it was forbidden to cook it in the city. By the way, the magic drink of the Gauls, Asterix and Obelix was just the same garum. At breakfast, Tertia informed her hated husband about her pregnancy. Her parents and she herself were not very happy about this news. Pregnancy in ancient Rome was considered with great caution, and the reasons were more than obvious. The number of women who died because of childbirth was greater than the number of men who died in the war. As a result, the shortage of women suitable for marriage had always been a problem in Rome. To this news, her husband said that he wants the child to have black eyes, and so our poor Tertia had to eat, just don't feed, a shrew. The Romans believed that this was the right remedy. In fact, she is obliged at least this time to give birth to his son. After breakfast, the wealthy Romans started to see their clients in the atrium. The poor went to the wealthy for alms. The Romans, even the poor, didn't work much, shifting their duties to slaves who worked hard for 12 hours a day. In some periods of history, the number of slaves was 1/3 of the population of the empire. While her husband went to the atrium, our Tertia goes to honor the layers, the patron gods of the house and family. Their cult was the women's thing. In her father's house, the girl had to make sure that the fire on the hearth won't go out, and collected flowers for her mother to decorate the hearth on calends, Ides, and Nones, and on all holidays. The first sacrifice that the bride had to bring in her husband's house was one to her new family's lares. And if every woman was a kind of domestic priestess of the cult of lares, and the well-being of the whole family depended on her, then there were women of a special kind who enjoyed real reverence, the Vestals. In their hands was the welfare of the whole state. No one in Rome was given as much honor as they were. The consul himself went off the road in front of them. If a criminal was being taken to execution met a Vestal, he was immediately released. Exclusively women were priestesses of Ceres and Juno. By the way, dolls were also associated with religion. The girls has a kind of modern Barbie, and when they grew up and got married, they dedicated their dolls to the goddesses Diana and Venus. Our Tertia turned to the lares with a request to assist in a very important matter. Meanwhile, it was noon. The noon was the line dividing the day into two parts. The time before was devoted to different activities, but in the afternoon, that's all. It was time for rest and entertainment. Public and trading activity on the streets faded. The midday siesta was universal, so one day Alaric, the king of the Visigoths, considered this time the best to attack Rome, because after eating everyone fell asleep as usual. Our Tertia also slept and went for a walk to see people and show herself. Of course, noble women were not allowed to walk the streets unaccompanied. But she hoped to see the young charioteer Gordian there. He was watching her with loving eyes during these walks and asking for a date. Tertia couldn't help but started to think about him all the time. The charioteers who competed in chariot races in ancient Rome were something like today's football superstars. They earned millions and basked in adoration, but very rarely lived to old age. Attitudes to infidelity and divorce changed dramatically in different periods of Roman history. In old Rome, divorce was unheard of. So that the year when the first Roman allowed his wife to divorce was memorized as they remembered the years of terrible battles and great events. This case caused a barrage of condemnation in Roman society. According to Plutarch, the legendary founder of Rome, Romulus, issued a law according to which a woman has no right to leave her husband, but the husband can run his wife off if she was guilty of poisoning or changing children or was caught in adultery. But men were allowed to do absolutely everything. At that time, Rome was a state of men and only for men. A man had to be punished severely only in one case, if he cheated on his wife with a married Roman woman. But slaves and prostitutes didn't count at all. But already from the first centuries AD, the attitude to divorce began to change radically. Already in the 2nd century, divorces became common. They could get divorced because the wife went out with her head uncovered, or the wife stopped to talk to an ex-slave with a bad reputation. But then the women could easily get divorced. No woman is ashamed to divorce, Seneca wrote, because women from noble families count the years not by the number of consuls, but the number of husbands. They get divorced to get married, and get married to get divorced. But our Tertia lives in harsher time. Tertia visited her parents and complained to her father about her husband's infidelities. He replied to her, "Obey your husband and do not watch him. Where he goes and what he does is his own business. He's right." Then he added, "Does he give you gold and dress? Does he provide you with food and servants? So be reasonable." It was time for dinner. By the way, in ancient Rome, everything was exactly the opposite. The rich ate at home, and the poor were forced to dine in bars and restaurants, because they didn't have their own kitchen. The cities of the empire were full of cheap establishments. In restaurants and bars, ordinary Romans spent most of their time free from work. The husband of our poor Tertia invited some of his friends to dinner. Dinner was a small home party and lasted for several hours, or even ended well after midnight. But Tertia was not in the mood for fun, she felt trapped. And Andronicus didn't even notice that his wife looked worried. He didn't care about it at all. He was drinking wine with his friends. Wine was a common drink of Italics, both rich and poor. The wealthy ones could afford the immortal Falernian. Working class drank cheap Sabinian. She could hardly wait for the end of the lunch. On certain holidays, and that day was one of them, April the 21st, the Dame of Rome foundation, the whole city used to gather for equestrian competition in the circus. And Tertia's heart was already beating faster. After all, today she would see him. Gordian would also enter the arena of the Circus Maximus, a majestic construction that could accommodate up to 150,000 spectators. She said to herself, if her driver wins, then she will take a chance and agrees to meet Gordian. The weather was rapidly deteriorating. On the way to the circus, she asked her husband to wait for her and approached one of the soothsayers. Caesar contemptuously called them astrologers from the circus. She asked if her dream would come true. No, the soothsayer said, the wind will prevent it from being fulfilled. Tertia laughed. Cheap fortune tellers just pull money out of the citizens. Finally, the magistrate gave a sign to start the competition by throwing a white handkerchief. 12 stalls opened at once, and chariots with carts drove out into the arena. Drivers on light wooden chariots had to circle the arena 7 times, round in turns at dangerously high speeds, trying not to crash into other chariots. For the charioteers themselves, this meant a constant risk of injury and often death. They rarely lived to old age. The winner was the one who was the first at the chalk line drawn in the front of the magistrate's lodge. A huge crowd roared supporting their charioteers. Then suddenly the wind blew harder. A violent storm arose. There was a fuss. People jumped up from their seats to leave the circus. She had never seen such a strong wind before. Statues and even columns were falling all around. One of them fell right on the chariot. People were screaming and no one was looking at the arena except Tertia. She died inside. Under that column was the one who made her heart beat faster. Her husband took her home. Tertia saw this as fate, an instruction from the gods that none of the Romans would dare to disobey. Gordian survived, but remained disabled. He and Tertia never saw each other again. Do like and subscribe if you enjoyed this story. Oh, and click on the bell so you get notified when the new episode comes out.